Hi, everyone.
Hey there, folks.
This is Amanda.
And this is Rita.
And you're listening to I Don't Know Her, the podcast where we talk about women you've probably never heard of.
But you should have.
And now you will. You probably already noticed that we're on a little bit of a delay with each other.
We are, and it's weird.
We're podcasting remotely again, not because of COVID, but because I'm visiting my wife's family in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, so we're doing this very long distance.
Truly very long distance. We decided, we had this idea in our minds last year to surprise Rita's mom. Or I'm sorry, Rita's mom. Nope.
Oh, that is so sweet.
I know. We wanted to surprise Abby's mom for Christmas, but we weren't sure if that was actually going to be doable. And then we got COVID, so we decided to keep the trip. And so we got in a few days ago, and we've been having a good time hanging out with her mom.
That's really awesome. It was a wonderful surprise.
Yeah, it's been really nice. The video is great.
Yes, there is a video of Abby surprising the crap out of her mother.
Her mom literally screamed and was holding our baby nephew and dropped him. She was in a chair.
It wasn't. It was not harsh. It wasn't that bad. Baby's fine.
No. But the baby was shocked. What are you doing? It was so sweet, though. We've been having a really good time, and it's been nice to see family. We haven't been to Pittsburgh since summer of 2019.
Wow, it's been a long time.
Yeah. Well, usually we come once a year, and we weren't going to come at all in 2020 because her sister and family were going to come visit us in Spokane. Had the stuff booked, the whole trip planned, and then when July came around, it just seemed like a bad idea. So they canceled their trip because of COVID. And so we bought our tickets to come here thinking that we bought them 7 months ago, thinking that, COVID will be much better by December.
Fools!
And that didn't happen. But because we both got sick, it was now we can't give it to anybody and we can't get it for at least 90 days, according to my doctor. So we decided to come for Christmas.
Yeah, that kind of hit at a convenient time. I know that it was bullshit and crazy, but for this schedule, it worked.
Yeah. If there was one good thing, it was that it allowed us to be able to travel here.
There you go.
So you have a thing you want to tell me.
I do. I was just curious, are you good at confrontation?
No. I will say that when I was younger, I was a lot more confrontational. I don't think it ever worked well for me, though.
I always felt like the old liquid courage was always a good one for me. And so I would always, get brave with that. But confrontation is not my strong suit because I usually shoot from the hip with it. And I say what I want to say and I say what I mean. And then I regret it later. And then I just dissect it all day long. And I'm like, oh man, maybe I should have said that. Or maybe I shouldn't have said that. And I confronted this person at work because in my mind, I was very upset at them of something that they did. They flaked out on something huge at work, and I just got pissed because I feel like you should be an adult and you should be able to take care of this. It's not that hard. So I was just seething, hot under the collar, pissed off. And so then the person comes in and is like, hi, how's it going, everybody? And I was like, fuck. It just made it worse. And I just didn't say anything. And I was just put my head down and I was doing my thing. And I was like, you know what? No, you fucked up and I'm pissed. So I went over it and I said so. I said, I just want to let you know, I'm really pissed at you. I said, I had to cancel plans with my son, which I don't want to do. I had a very disappointed child, which I don't want to see. And I was like, and you really fucked up. So don't talk to me for the rest of the night, please. And just left it at that. And they were like, oh, I'm sorry. And didn't even know what to say. And I was just like, no, I don't want your sorry. I don't want your nothing. I said, I'll cool down eventually, but just leave me alone. And then later on,
And
I was like,
no, go ahead.
I was like, was that too mean? Was that too harsh? Or like, I just had to get it off my chest, or I'd be pissed off the rest of my shift.
Well, have you seen that person since then?
No.
So you don't know if it's like, okay, we're cool now?
Not quite sure, but honestly, I feel like if I do see them and they're like, hey, are you okay? I'd be like, no, I'm not ready. I still don't like you right now.
I think it's when you are in a work situation and someone doesn't follow through with a thing that then impacts how you can do your work and your personal life, I think it's absolutely acceptable to say something to them and to have feelings about the way you feel about them, right? You're not going to be like, everything is great. Actually, I want to murder you.
Yeah, I don't want to do that.
I think it's so hard because I've been working in the school system for so long that there are you have to follow it's very hard to have a conversation with a fellow teacher about something you perceive them not doing correctly, because there's a whole HR union administration, they all have to get involved. And it's just really hard. You can't really just have a one-on-one conversation with somebody the way you did. So I don't even have a frame of reference for that. The last time I had a confrontation at work, a real confrontation at work that wasn't about students, but it was about a personal problem, was after I had just started a new English teaching job, and we were in a department meeting. So it was just English teachers talking. And I had prior to that been an elementary librarian in the same district. Actually, it was a K-8 school, and then we went to the middle school again, and so that's how come I got to be an English teacher. And this teacher just did not like me from the second I walked in the room. I'd never even had a conversation with him prior to this.
Okay.
And we were talking about iPads and whether or not our school was going to get them. And I had just previously, maybe a week or so earlier, talked to the woman who was in charge of technology. And I was like, no, we're only going to get 2 carts for the whole school. And he was like, no, we're getting a cart for every room. And I was like, no, we're getting 2 for the whole school. And he just fucking slammed this desk, stood up and he was like, I can't fucking deal with this.
Whoa.
And then walked out of the room.
Oh my God.
And it's not like we were having an argument. It was we had a disagreement about whether or not these iPads were coming. And I had talked to this person and they had told me this, maybe it's not that, but that's what I was told. And that he just could not handle it. And so then the principal called me in and was like, tell me about what happened. And I was like, I said we were only going to get 2 carts of iPads. And the principal was like, yeah, that's right. And I was like, well, apparently he didn't like that, but he especially didn't like that news coming from me.
Apparently I went and murdered his mother and slapped him across the face. So
yeah. And the principal acted like we had an equal part in this conversation. And I was like, no, I was just sitting there talking. Every other teacher that was in the room was like, oh my God, that was very unprofessional. And I was like, yeah, I thought so too, but you guys know him better. I don't know him. And the principal was still like, oh, well, you need to just tone it down.
That's ridiculous. That I would.
And yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that happens if you're an opinionated person or just even a peer opinionated.
Yeah. And
of a certain look.
I ended up disclosing to both my bosses. I said just, hey, I want to let you know, this is what I said. This is how I felt. And I said, honestly, I am really mad. I said, but I'm just letting you know that I said something just to make sure that that's there. So nothing comes back and they say, well, you didn't tell us that you felt this way or anything like that. I'd be like, no, I told you.
I think also there is a thing about gender and confrontation, right?
Oh, yeah.
It is pretty expected that women are supposed to be, seen and not heard. And so for you to be outspoken about your feelings and how somebody has, impacted your life, I could see why people would be like, whoa, what is that all about? You know what I mean?
Yeah. And also,
but I think that's gendered bullshit.
Yes. A lot of people have the same feelings as I do, but they don't want to say anything. They just sit there and they fume. And I'm like, I have spent too much of my life not saying how I feel when someone makes me feel upset or in a bad way, or are not aware of that their actions affect other people. And I'm kind of over that. And I just wanted to let that person know, because I was like, you messed up my night. I was supposed to have the night off. I had this entire night planned with my son that I had promised him we were going to do. And I had to put that on the back burner. And that to me is just awful.
I think you're well within your rights to let somebody know how their actions impacted you, because potentially in the future, they'll remember not to fucking do that.
Yeah. And I think that's the main thing, is just don't do that again. Just freaking show up.
Yeah. Do what you're supposed to do because other people depend on you.
Yeah.
That's like a good life lesson to make sure you've learned.
Yeah. All around, it's a pretty good thing to follow. But I did chew on it pretty much. I mean, it's been days and I'm talking about it, so I'm still chewing on it. So usually I do feel good that I can get things off of my shoulders, but the process of it, like fully leaving me with like in relief and like what said was said, has not yet happened.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I worked on this with my therapist, and it's just that all around feeling of not wanting to stir the water and have everybody like you. And yeah, because as soon as you do that, then, someone might form a certain opinion of you, and it puts a rift in between, relationships, work or personal.
I find that usually if I'm still chewing on something days later, like if I'm having anxiety about it, then there's something about either what I said or what the other person said that makes me still feel like, oh, either I should have said this differently or approached this differently, or two, I really wish they would have responded in a way that meant X, Y, or Z.
I think it's that. Yeah, because the person...
So you wish maybe that
the person was like, oh, it wasn't intentional. That was the response.
Yeah, so that's like that... Intent does not equal impact.
Yeah, there was just like fireballs in my eyes.
Yeah, just because you didn't mean to doesn't mean that's not what happened.
Yeah. I'm just going to shove you, and I didn't mean to, but I'm still going to shove you.
Yeah. Well, actually in Ijeoma Oluo's book, So You Want to Talk About Race, she uses the metaphor of that, like, microaggressions, and of course I'm talking about race in this instance, but I think it's similar in its vein, which is that, like, when you're walking along the street and like everybody is punching your arm, and you're getting punched in the arm and punched in the arm and punched in the arm and punched in the arm, and then one time somebody punches you in the arm but they don't mean to, it was an accident. That doesn't mean you don't feel like they just fucking punched you in the arm.
Yeah.
So like in this situation, it's like, yeah, you may not have meant to make me upset or to fuck up my day and my night with my son, but that's what you did. Mm-hmm. So you need to apologize for the thing you did, not the intention you had.
Yeah. And next time, pay closer attention.
Yeah.
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 Well, definitely
on a side note,
feels better to talk about it.
Good. On a side note, I miss Washington for a lot of reasons always whenever I leave it, but I especially miss it when I come to Pittsburgh, because in Pittsburgh, you have to buy beer at the beer store. You have to buy wine at the wine store. What? You have to buy liquor at the liquor store.
That is weird.
Oh, it's the worst. So we wanted to get some beer and some wine and some liquor all in our trip today. And I was telling Rita before we started recording that we had a pretty hairy day because like we went to this one area of town that it was just crowded with people doing Christmas shopping, and everything we went into was never quite the right thing. And by the time we were done, there was just no way we had time to hit all of those places. And I was like, why don't you just have them in the goddamn grocery stores?
We've got everything.
We got everything all in one store. And I know that hasn't been totally awesome for lots of folks, but like, it's so convenient.
It is. It really is.
So in any case, if you're going to visit Pennsylvania, just remember they have leftover Puritan laws about alcohol.
Oh, it's terrible. No, thank you.
On that note, do you have someone for me today?
I do. And this is somebody that I really kind of fell in love with. Have you heard of Sibylla Merian?
I have definitely not heard of that woman.
And I don't know if I'm pronouncing the middle name right. Sebylla.
Yeah, I would assume it's probably Sibylla.
Yeah, I'm not sure. And she's German, so...
I guess it could be like Sibylla.
Sibylla? So I'm just going to skip over that name and not really say it a lot. So Maria is a naturalist, which is a person who studies nature by direct observation. She's a scientific illustrator, a botanist, and an entomologist.
You know, Abby would love this one for sure.
And I am a huge fan of entomology. I was a country kid, so I was constantly like putting things in jars and running around in the cornfields and picking up little critters to bring back home and frogs. And we found a turtle one time and I brought him home. Tadpoles. I raised my own frogs from tadpoles to maturity. And yeah.
Really?
Yes. And I had a jar of spiders that were garden spiders, which are pretty much the size of like a silver dollar or bigger. And like I had this full jar of spiders under my bed and my mom like freaked out and she made me throw it into the field.
Well, yeah, I agree with Mom on that one.
Yeah.
A jar of spiders under your bed sounds like a literal nightmare.
I did have them all. I had like 6 of them. And then like one day there was like only 4. And then there was like 2. And then there was one giant one that was left.
Oh, he was eating all of the others.
Oh, yeah. Actually, it was a she because then there was this huge egg sack. And that's when my mom made me throw it away.
So gross.
But I was like, but she's special. She's like the queen. She killed them all. Yeah. So I was a weird little bug kid. But so Maria was born on April 12th in 1647.
Oh, long time ago.
Yeah. Born in Frankfurt, Germany to a Swiss family. Her father was an engraver and a publisher and ran one of the largest publishing houses in Europe. Maria's mother, Johanna, was her father's second wife, and when they had Maria, she was her father's 9th child. Like, yeah.
I just don't like it when people have litters.
It's a lot, but between 2 wives. So I think his first wife, they had 7, and then his second wife, they had 2.
I just can't imagine having 7 children. I mean, that woman, I'm so sorry for her.
So when Maria was 3 years old, her father passed away. Her mother remarried quite quickly within the same year. She married an artist named Jacob Merrill, who was a renowned flower and still life painter. At the time in the 1650s, realistic still life paintings, especially still lifes of flowers, were a real hot commodity. People would pay like these crazy high prices for these paintings of still lifes of flowers. I don't know why. It was just everybody wanted them. It was a big focal point of people's, estates. Since Maria's stepfather had studied this form of art, he began to take on students and he began to teach the style, which I thought was like, dude, you've got like an edge on the market. You're going to start teaching people how to do this? Like, keep it in the bag. So her family was really well off and she lived a pretty privileged life. She was able to learn to read, write, paint, and because her father had been a publisher, she actually learned how to print books alongside her brothers. Her brothers, however, were allowed to finish their artistic education abroad, but Maria had to stay home to be, in quotations, finished into a lady. Which, I mean, how do you finish a person?
Yeah, finishing school. I've never really thought about like what that meant. But yeah, that's what it's saying. It's like, oh, you're just a beginner. We're going to make sure you finish becoming a woman. Gross. I don't like it.
But every piece of your originality is snuffed. So she filled her time with studying with her stepfather's natural history books and helping him with his compositions. Jacob would need insects, leaves, and flowers to be gathered for his still life models. So Maria would go out and gather the things that were going to be used for him. And this was her first connection to seeing that nature and art could go hand in hand. Her favorite objects to pick were plants, caterpillars. She particularly liked silkworms, which I've never seen a silkworm before. And apparently silkworms...
I don't think I've seen one in real life either.
No, I don't think I've seen one. Apparently silkworms were all over the place in Frankfurt because at the time there was a booming silk trade happening in the area. So at the age of 13, she gathered a few larvae together and actually raised her own silkworms, which I really admire because I raise my own frogs. So she observed them, she sketched them, she watched them grow from larvae and changed them into domestic silk moths. And so she said this about her liking of collecting insects. I spent my time investigating insects. At the beginning, I started with silkworms in my home in Frankfurt. I realized that other caterpillars produce beautiful butterflies or moths and that silkworms did the same. They led me to collect all the caterpillars I could find in order to see how they changed. So now she's just running around, she's grabbing all the caterpillars.
You know, that's the one thing I did try. I got a caterpillar, put it in a jar. I got it to make a cocoon.
Oh.
But it died in the cocoon and it never... I don't know what I was supposed to be doing, though. I just was like, I think you're okay in the jar.
Did you feed
They probably need, like, moisture. I don't know.
Yeah, it needs air.
Yeah, I think I had holes in the top. But, like, and I saw it make a cocoon. It just never emerged. And I was very, very bummed because that's the one thing I wanted. I wanted to see it emerge.
But her drawings and paintings of silkworms showed promise. Even though she was young, her observations and illustrations of insects and plants at their various life stages were remarkable for their scientific quality. She soon became a student of her stepfathers. Jacob had one of his students, Abraham Mignon, help teach her and train her alongside another student named Johann Graf. So what do you think is going to happen to two students who are thrown together and they're painting and studying closely together?
Bow, chicka, bow, bow.
Over the bugs.
It's a different version of Jeff Goldblum's The Fly.
Yes. So some accounts said she was 18. Some accounts say she was 16. I'm not really sure which one she was, but Maria and Johann get married. About 3 years into their marriage, they have a daughter that they name Joanna, and they decide to pick up and move their family to Nuremberg, which was Johann's hometown. So they lived in Nuremberg for 14 years, and according to a few of my resources, their marriage was not a happy one. Like from the beginning, it wasn't easy, and it wasn't a good one.
So did they get married because they were being forced to?
There wasn't a whole lot of details of it needing to be arranged, or I don't know if maybe because she was very wealthy and maybe he's a student, he's an artist and he needed some cash. I don't know. But it just said that their relationship wasn't good. So she spent most of her time taking care of their home. They had a daughter, yes, Joanna, and she took care of her home, she took care of her family, but she made sure to find time to continue to sketch and paint. She used paper and linens to work on, sometimes even painting patterns on linen so that she could use it to embroider the images for like pillows and blankets that were in her home, which was really cool.
That's cool.
Part of her process was to actively walk and hike around Nuremberg to hunt for her own specimens. And she gathered up plants, butterflies, ants, moths, spiders, larvae, eggs, cocoons, and all kinds of flowers. So like her house is full of like all these jars and all these boxes and potted plants and like all these little tiny science experiments are like all covering her kitchen and stuff. So maybe he was pissed at her because of that.
Yeah, maybe he was like, I didn't think I was marrying like a hoarder of bugs.
Yeah, and little animals and snakes and things like that. So maybe that was a little much for him. I'm not sure. So her reputation as an artist spread around the city, and she took to teaching art as well. She did a thing that was pretty funny. She targeted wealthy families with unmarried daughters. So she would say to the families, like, yeah, she'd say to the families, hey, like, if your daughter learns to paint, it'll further, her desirability and her status. So she'd get invited to like these grand estates, and then she would like get to see their extravagant gardens, and then she would pull a bunch of specimens from their gardens.
That's what she was using these like young women for?
Yes.
Their gardens? Well, that was a little bit of an innuendo. I like to garden sometimes too.
I just thought it was funny of like, I could just picture her like shoving a bunch of jars in her bag and she's like clinking out the door.
Well, it's like, yeah. That fern looks great. And you're over here like pulling a bee off of a flower, and the lady's like, "What are you doing?"
I'm just thinning it out. It's a little thick. So one thing that made Maria's illustrations extremely unique and vital was that she collected, then raised her specimens, observed them, and documented their growth and change. So she didn't just grab stuff and preserve them like how most people used to do, and they would just work off of this dried piece of like preserved bug or leaves or flowers. She would actually take them home and raise them, which actually wasn't even done yet in the 1600s.
Well, and that allowed her to like really truly understand the science behind what she's doing.
She went as far as even finding out like each of the insects' individual diets and their duration of their life cycles by doing it this way. And along with her painting, Maria created copperplate engravings. Have you ever heard of that?
No, I don't know what that is.
These engravings are done on like various sizes of copper plates. They're really thin. You just use like a metal tool to engrave by hand whatever image you want on there. So you have to be very, very careful because the copper is very soft. And so you cut in this design, then you put ink in your hand and you rub ink into the engraving, and then you wipe it off, and then you use it like a stamp.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, I'd never seen that happen, but I looked it up. It looks like a really neat process. I'd probably fuck it up, but it looks neat. She ended up using the prints, cutting them out with the stamp on them, and then she would use watercolors to fill in all the colorings of the images. Because I didn't know this, but women were forbidden to paint with oils at the time.
Why?
Yeah, I guess the guild system where, like there's like this group of men who decide what the like guidelines are for this trade. And they're just like, women can't paint with oils. That's for men. They need to do watercolors only because it's more delicate and freeform. What the hell?
That's such a weird line to draw in the sand.
I don't know. So these copper plates were mostly of botanical images. They were pretty. They were leaning more towards the artsy side than the science side of them. And Maria was not quite sure like how to present them as scientific observations, 'cause she didn't know how well that would be received at the time. And so her husband ended up publishing her work in 3 separate volumes from 1675 to 1680. And they were compiled together in a series called, and pardon my German, Nun Bloombuch. Stop it.
I'm not going to pardon your German at all.
Well, it means New Book of Flowers. What? I said it right, didn't I? New?
I'm sure you did. It just sounded like new, and that's just funny.
I don't know. It's called New Book of Flowers there. I'll just say it in English. So this solidified her name as a botanical artist. In many of her prints, she would sneak in like insects hiding among the leaves, but they were never like the star of her picture. After her second volume of the series came out, Maria wanted to come out with another book that would display what was her true life's passion, which was the entomology. So during her time in Nuremberg, she had documented the life cycles of 186 insect species. Many had never been documented before.
186?
Yeah. And at the time, like, bugs were on the lowest rung of the ladder. Nobody freaking cared about bugs. They just thought they were a burden, of no consequence.
Nuisances, I'm sure.
Yeah, basically. So after giving birth to her second daughter, Dorothea, she went on to publish...
Wait, when did she have her first one?
The first one was in... The first one was like 3 years after they got married.
Okay.
And I believe her daughters are like maybe 8 to 10 years apart. She went on to publish a different volume, this time... Oh, man, I can't even. Do you want me to try to say the title of this book?
For Will you please?
Okay. I'm just going to lick my lips.
Yeah, Lucas, okay. Get it.
Der Raupen, wunderbar, Verwanderung und sonderbar Blumennahrung.
I love the way you say whatever the Blumen word is. Blumen.
This came out in 1679. It is called Caterpillars, Their Wondrous Transformation and Peculiar Nourishment from Flowers. Yeah.
Their peculiar nourishment.
Yes. So this extraordinary book depicted in detail the metamorphosis of moths and butterflies, and on each illustration, the insect was shown on or beside its plant food source, accompanied by a detailed text describing the stage of metamorphosis illustrated. Nobody had ever done that before.
Really?
No, of showing the whole cycle from larva to caterpillar to cocoon to butterfly. And another unique aspect of her book, since she worked off of specimens that were alive, her coloring in her pictures was completely accurate. Because most of the specimens that were dead were like dulled out because they were, obviously they were dead. So she would like make notations of the coloring of each of these specimens, and she had a catalog of like all these plants that she knew could create that color. So she would like draw the caterpillar, and she'd be like, oh, this yellow is this kind of yellow that I can get from this flower or this plant, to make sure that she had all the coloring accurate on each piece.
So her actual like paints are also coming from plants?
Yes.
Well, that's impressive as well.
And her work was scientifically accurate, and it brought a new standard of precision to scientific illustration. She even debunked the idea that most insects came from the mud, which was a thing.
Oh,
yeah.
Old science.
Oh, yeah. She documented these insects for over a decade, and she would stay up at all hours of the night waiting with a magnifying glass so that she could watch larvae hatch from eggs. And she's like, they don't just come from nowhere. They come from eggs that the adult parents lay, and the concept that the scientists called spontaneous generation, like it didn't fucking exist. It wasn't like, oh, there was no bug and now there's a bug. Yeah, because they couldn't explain it. They just said it was spontaneous. Yeah.
Spontaneous generation. That's, never mind. I won't make that joke. It's Christmas time. I won't do it.
Oh, no. I know exactly where you're at in your head. And I am actually going to send you a quick photo of one of her paintings so you can see what I'm talking about. Just let me know when you get that. Do you have your phone on you?
I do. I do.
She even spent a lot of time observing the weather and food supplies and how this would affect the population of insects. She made discoveries in relation to larvae that she recorded that they shed their, what is it called, exoskeletons multiple times, which people didn't know had happened. She did this with like drawing and showing the shed of the exoskeleton in detailed form. And this was a quote from the title page of this book. She said, "Wherein by means of an entirely new invention, the origin, food, and development of caterpillars, worms, butterflies, moths, flies, and other such little animals, including times, places, and characteristics for naturalists, artists, gardeners, and diligently examined, briefly described, painted from nature, engraved in copper, and published independently." She went on to
I always
publish...
think it's...
Oh, go for it.
I was going to say, I always think it's funny that old books will tell you everything about it before you even open it. Like, this is what's contained therein.
Was that a way of like watching a preview like you do for movies, basically?
I think it was definitely like, if you're interested in A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, you'll be interested in this book.
I would have to have somebody read those to me just for fun. Well, she went on to publish her third volume of the New Flowers. I'm not going to say it again. In 1680, and then her second volume of her caterpillar books. Maria and her family returned to Frankfurt around this time. They went back to care for her mother after her stepfather Jacob passed away. In 1685, though, Maria's husband Johann left back to Nuremberg by himself, and the couple separated.
Yeah. When you said at the beginning that they didn't get along, I was like, tick-tock, what's happening here?
Well, from what I gathered from different sources, it got a little messy. And Johann tried aggressively to get her back, but she refused.
Oh.
Yeah, she refused to mend the relationship. So something was going on. I don't know.
It's like maybe it was one of those couples, they fight and fuck and then fight and fuck. And you're always like, no, could you just break up? Because that would probably be better for everybody.
The cycle of abuse needs to end. Yes. So she ended up refusing to get back with Johann. She packed up her mom and her two daughters, and she moved to West Friesland, which is now the Netherlands, where one of her half-brothers lived. Honestly, this was like a separatist colony called the Labadists. I've never heard of them.
I don't think I have either.
Well, while she was there, she stopped painting as much. She put out hardly any work, and they were there for about 6 years till her mother passed away. She finally was legally divorced from Johann. So then she picked up again and she moved the family to Amsterdam. I think maybe she was just waiting that fucker out.
And I also think if her mom died, maybe her mom had been sick and she was taking care of her children and her mother and trying to divorce this guy and living in a different country. And it was work is going to wait.
Yeah. Might need to emotionally take a minute too. So when they moved to Amsterdam, she found like a different world. It was a world that was thriving because of trade, and there women were legally allowed to have businesses. They were allowed to earn money. So she brought her collection of drawings. She began teaching again, and by selling her drawings, she was able to earn like a substantial income.
Good for her. And also good for Amsterdam.
And her daughter, Joanna, actually became really good at watercolors as well. She started selling art herself. And then the little sister, Dorothea, was right behind her big sister with doing that. Maria started to get to know prominent residents in Amsterdam, people who had private collections of specimens that she had never seen before. It was actually quite an exciting time for her. Her eldest daughter met and married a merchant, which was a pretty good family hookup because her now new son-in-law, she could use his trade connections to get imported specimens. Yeah. I like her edge on the hustle, by the way. She's just like, hey.
Yeah, I know. I was like, she's like, oh, you're a merchant, huh? How about you get me some of those sweet North African bees?
Oh, but even though she was getting like specimens from the Americas, she still wasn't happy dealing with dead and preserved insects. So she decided her eldest is married. She's going to pick up her youngest daughter and she was going to sell everything. And she was going to embark on a trip to go back to observing specimens in their own habitat. So Maria and Dorothea buy passage to northeast coast of South America. So that's not just a little trip.
Ooh.
That's a big trip.
So the northeast coast of South America.
Let me see. It was a Dutch colony called Suriname on the northeast coast of South America. So this trip was a first, for her to travel by herself, which we always seem to run into. Like, that's a common thread between a lot of our people. And also, it was pretty shocking that she personally financed her own trip. Like, other scientists were, like, sitting over here, like, begging for scraps and grants and things. And she's just like, nah, I got money. I'm going to go on my scientific excursion.
Yeah, well, remember Jeanne Barret, the first woman to circumnavigate the globe?
Oh, yeah.
And she like, had to go with her boyfriend, whose trip was funded by, like, an aristocrat.
Same thing with Ida Pfeiffer. She had to sell her journals first to collect money, and then she'd be able to take her trips.
Yeah, so I can see why they would have to have a sponsor or something like that.
So once word got out in the colony about the work she was there to do, the local natives and slaves that were there would bring her interesting plants and insects. And her interaction with the natives and slaves really shocked and saddened her. And she wrote extensively in her journal about it, especially about meeting and working with the women that were slaves there. This particular paragraph I'm going to read is about her interaction with the women and learning about this flower called the peacock flower. She said, the Indians who are not treated well by their Dutch masters use the seeds to abort their children so that they will not become slaves like themselves. The black slaves from Guinea and Angola have demanded to be treated well, threatening to refuse to have children. In fact, they sometimes take their own lives because they're treated so badly, and because they will be born again, free and living in their own land. They told me this themselves. She was really saddened and upset, but for her to document this and actually publish this was a big deal for that time. And for her to openly judge the colonies too.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like white folks come out smelling like roses in that clip.
No.
I mean, if people are feeling so terrible by the way you treat them that they're aborting their fetuses and killing themselves, pretty good indication that their life is hell.
Mm-hmm. In her writings,
and that would not reflect well, I would think.
No. Well, in her writings, Maria gave credit to all the natives and slaves that helped her in her research, and she learned more from them than she would ever learn from the white colonies. She said that the merchants would even laugh at her because they said, "Why are you seeking anything other than sugar in this country?" Yeah.
Ignorance.
So the years she spent in Suriname, she tirelessly sketched and observed local animals, plants, and insects. And she made sure to record the local natives' names for the plants as well. And she also cataloged all the local uses for them. Initially, her trip was going to be 5 years, but after 3, Maria returned to the Netherlands. One source said that she got sick. It was probably malaria, but they're not sure. That's what forced her to leave early. So back home, she decided to open up a shop where she could sell her specimens and engravings of plants and animal life that she found in Suriname. She took all her research material and combined it into a book she had published in 1705. And this book was called Metamorphosis Insectorum Surinamensium, which the book was entirely written in Latin, which is, I guess, the language of science. I didn't know that.
Wow.
Yeah. And it was about all the insects she studied there, and it contained over 60 copper plate engravings that she did by hand.
Can you imagine making all of those?
What if you messed up? What if you're like almost done and you like sneeze and you like drag your tool across it? I don't know if I'd have the
You'd have
patience
to restart it. Oh my God.
This book that she came out with ruffled some feathers. One of her illustration shows a tarantula that she observed, and it's like aggressively eating this little hummingbird. Yeah, like the little hummingbird's neck is like all bent back, and this tarantula is just like eating it. And then another one was an illustration of these ants that can connect themselves to form ladders so the other ants can travel across them. And people just thought, like, this lady's crazy. Like, she's drawing these crazy ass photos and she doesn't know what she's talking about.
Oh, I'm sure those people were grossed out by them.
Another illustration was a large sphinx moth. It has a long tongue that is used to sip nectar out of flowers. In her illustration, the tongue was split, and scientists were like, no one's ever seen that. They don't have split tongues. And it was actually because she watched its entire life cycle, because for a brief moment after sphinx moths are born, their tongues split. So she actually had seen it, but people just didn't believe her.
Interesting.
So the book was the first illustrated accounts of natural history of Suriname. No other work like this had been completed. A couple of the photos, there are some mistakes because she had to pick up and leave so quickly because she was ill. Some of the illustrations, the caterpillar is with the wrong butterfly. So then a lot of scientists tried to discredit her because they said she mixed up the caterpillars.
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty big mistake.
Yeah. So Maria went on to, well, despite the mistakes, the book was revolutionary, and Maria was the first European woman to independently go on a scientific expedition in South America. Maria ended up going on to correspond with scientists across Europe, and her books were added to libraries. Her drawings would be used to help catalog and classify insects, and she was praised by Germany's most celebrated poet. And I don't know if you know who this poet is. You probably do. Is it Goethe?
Yes.
Yeah. He said he admired her ability to move between art and science, between nature and observation, and artistic intention. So in 1715, Maria suffered a stroke, leaving her partially paralyzed. Despite her handicap, she continued to work in paint. But in 1717, she died just shy of her 70th birthday. Her remaining artwork was purchased by a Russian Tsar named Peter the Great. And
Peter the Great. I know him real well.
Oh, you do?
No, I'm just joking. No. I know
He's
nothing
great.
about Russian
I've heard
history.
he's great. He even went on to extend an invitation to Dorothea to work as a scientific illustrator for him. And she accepted the position and became the first woman to be employed by the Russian Academy of Science. And her
That's
daughter,
really cool.
Yeah. And her daughter, Joanna, ended up moving down to Suriname with her husband to continue her mother's work, and likewise became a renowned artist as well. Over the next 200 years after Maria died, her work and her name nearly disappeared completely. Her name was left out of history books, and her research was used but not credited. Yeah.
Oh, I hate that.
In the last quarter of the 20th century, the work of Maria's was reevaluated, validated, and reprinted. People argued that, with her mistakes, you should just discredit the work as a whole, but other people were like, no, this is invaluable. And they said, well, why don't you throw out all of Isaac Newton's work, because he fucked up on some things too.
Yeah. I mean, I think we can come up with a lot of folks who were doing early science and didn't have all of their facts correct, but still advanced the ideas of what they were doing.
The renewed scientific and artistic interest in her work was triggered in part by a number of scholars who discovered and examined her collections and realized the overwhelming amount of scientific data that she unearthed way before anyone else. In 2016, her book Metamorphosis was republished and updated with new scientific descriptions, and in June 2017, a symposium was held in her honor in Amsterdam. In March of 2017, the Lloyd Library and Museum hosted Off the Page. It was an exhibit rendering many of Maria's illustrations, but they were created into 3D sculptures, and they incorporated
cool.
Yeah, they incorporated preserved insects, plants, and taxidermy specimens, which I dug. I was trying to find these sculptures because I really wanted to see it, and I couldn't find them. I even went to the museum's website and couldn't find them. Many of Maria's little creatures have been named after her, including the bird-eating spider. She has butterflies, moths, beetles, reptiles, bees, etc., bearing her name. It was Maria's dedication and attention to detail and a blend of art and science that made her a trailbreaker in the world of entomology and botany and naturalistic art. She's what I always wanted to be, and I love her. I would have, if you look back in your life and you're like, wow, I wish I would have really pursued that would have been it.
Entomology?
Yeah, I just love bugs. I actually bought new pair of earrings that have preserved moth wings in them.
That's Rita, that is a whole different level for you. Did you ever have to do that? We took biology or whatever. I don't remember if it was biology or not, but the first project we had to do for class was to gather. We had to find at least, I think it was like 30 different insects and like pin them to a styrofoam board and bring them to school. Yeah. You're going to be so stoked when, I think I found like 20 and then I really struggled with the others. My parents didn't usually help me with any work, but I was like, you guys, I can't find the bugs. And both my mom and my stepdad went with me to the dam. We had this like little dam that kept the water from our town, and waded through the water with me, gathering insects in the grass and stuff like that.
Wow.
Like, it's probably one of my fondest memories of my parents, one of my only fondest memories of my parents, that they were trudging through the water and mud to help me find bugs.
Yeah, well, it just, there's something about the way that their bodies are shaped, what they do. I mean, they're such tiny little players, but big players in nature. Mm-hmm. They're just interesting to look at. I think all of the designs and patterns that are on them, especially like butterflies and big beetles, not just the little beetles, but the big ones, are really neat to look at.
You haven't spent much time in the South, have you? Or the Southwest?
No.
My family is all in Oklahoma, as you know. And I remember one summer I went down there and I was sitting outside on Mama's patio. And there was this real cool, in the flower bed, really cool, beautiful black rock. And I was like, that is the coolest rock I have ever seen in my life. it is so black. I've never even seen a rock that black. I wonder where she got that rock. And I'm sitting there and I'm looking at it and I was like, I want to go over and touch it. Looks like it's shiny. I bet it's smooth. And I got up and I went over there and that motherfucker was not a rock. It was a fucking beetle. And it was like the size of my head. I had never seen a beetle that big in my life.
Oh my gosh.
I ran away screaming. I screamed. I locked the doors like it could open them. I don't know.
Oh, they figured out how to open doors.
I mean, at one time I walked in the kitchen, there was a scorpion on the floor.
Oh, jeez.
So, yeah, that because my mom wanted me to stay there and live there forever. And I was like, we are not living here. This is not happening. I'm not living with these things. The scorpion made its way into the house. How did it get here? Who knows? The door was shut.
Well, I do have to admit that my frogs had a rather dire fate.
I bet they did.
I
Little
raised
kids
them
don't do a good job.
from the tadpoles that they were, and so I had them in my room, and my mom was like, Rita Maria, get the hell out of my house. You can't have frogs. Because I thought I was hiding them well, and then you could start hearing them like ruh, ruh, at night. And so my mom was like, I know you've got frogs in here. Like, get them out. So I had to put them outside, and they were in a big giant pickle jar. And it was really cold that night. So I went to go look at them the next morning, and they were frozen, like suspended with their little arms like out. And I was devastated. I started crying, and I thought, I'll warm them up and that'll work. Cause they're just, I'll warm them up and they will come back alive again. So I warmed up the water and they just like were floating at the top. Oh. And that's when I realized that frogs, ice can kill them.
Yeah. Well, cause their skin is made of water. Yes.
I felt so bad. I was like, if I had just kept them inside.
Mom!
I know. Wouldn't let me have my frogs. Well, let me tell you a little bit about the resources that I used.
I never did get your message. I never got your text.
You didn't?
Mm-mm.
Yeah. That's odd.
Yeah, that's weird.
I'll resend you some stuff.
Okay.
So the resources that I used was botanicalartandartists.com, a New York Times article called A Pioneering Woman of Science Reemerges After 300 Years by Joanna Klein, Britannica.com, an article from The Atlantic by Andrea Wolf, The Woman Who Made Science Beautiful, the Natural Museum of Women in the Arts, the New York Historical Society, the life story of Maria Sibylla Merian, and the Met Museum for teaching me how to make a copper plate engraving. Actually, the Met Museum shows you in full detail of how to do that process. So if you're ever interested in doing it, you can find it there.
I want to go look at it, honestly.
I know, because at first they were saying copper plate printing, and I was like, how do you print from a metal plate? I didn't get it until I looked and saw how it was done.
That's really cool.
All right.
Thank you for sharing her story. I loved it, and I loved seeing how excited you were about it.
So if anybody wants to, get me a little entomology set or, a new microscope, I could relive some shattered dreams.
Christmas is here, so perhaps.
All right, folks. Well, thank you for tuning in. We'd like to thank Lucas McIntyre, our editor, for all the work that he does for us. And we'd like to thank Jennifer Finch of L7 for lending us our wonderful theme music. And also, if you haven't already, check out our Patreon. You can find it in our link tree on our Instagram. Give us some support if you like what you hear, and do it for the bugs.
Do it for the bugs. Thank you for listening and for tuning in.
All right, guys. Till next time.